Welcome back, everyone. Today we're making a tote handbag. And this pattern comes in 4 different sizes, has multiple pockets on the inside and outside, and it's super easy to make. So if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you need 1/4 to 1 yard for your main fabric, and this is depending on what size you're making within the pattern. If you're making the smallest size, you'll need 1/4 yard. If you're making the largest size, you'll need 1 yard. And the same goes for the secondary fabric. And I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These are all very durable fabrics and they're easy to work with. I'm actually going to be using a mixture of a denim and upholstery. I'm using upholstery for the bottom for a little bit of structure and then denim up top. But like always, get creative with it and use whatever fabric that's really going to bring your design together. You'll need 1/4 to 1 yard for your secondary fabric, and this is going to be a lightweight material. I'm going to be using a very lightweight twill. I found it was a great way to go, but if you really want to, you can use the same material for the main fabric and the secondary fabric. You'll need one 7 to 15 inch zipper, and again, this is depending on the size bag you're making. I'll be cutting mine off of a zipper roll. It's a great way to go. You reduce a lot of waste and you get precise cuts. If you're unsure about it, just make sure your zipper is longer than 15 inches because we will be trimming the ends. You'll need 2 yards of 1 inch width webbing. This is going to be used for the main strap, and the hardware going along with that strap, you'll need 1 strap adjuster, 2 D-rings, and 2 lobster clasps. And all of this hardware you want to match the width of your webbing. Since we're using 1 inch width webbing, we're going to get 1 inch width hardware. For the closure at the top of the bag, you'll need 2 eyelets. You can get these in any size, a 1/2 yard of cord, and you can get any style of cord or drawstring, and 1 cord stopper. Just make sure your cord stopper fits snugly around your cord. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before you tape it together, the best thing to do is cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. Once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. Real quick, before you print the entire pattern, I set it up in a way that you only have to print certain pages per size. The print size guide and size chart is on the second page of the pattern, so take a look at that, determine what size you want to print, and then go from there. But don't worry, I'll be going through each of them to ensure you printed the right pages per size. The first one we're going to take a look at is the size large, and you're going to want to print the pages 1, 2, and 3 through 11. If you're choosing this option, it should look like this on the screen. Keep in mind you will get cutoff panels from other sizes. If you're looking to make the medium, you're going to want to print pages 1, 2, and 8 through 13. And it should look like what I have laid out on the screen. For the size small, you're going to want to print pages 1, 2, and 13 through 19. And just double check to make sure yours matches what is on the screen. And lastly, if you're printing extra small, you're going to want to print pages 1, 2, and 20 through 22. This is the smallest size, so it's going to take the least amount of paper. For the video, I'm going to be making the size large. It's going to look like this, and always double check your printer alignment so the pages line up perfectly. And from here, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. After choosing a size and cutting out your fabric, you're going to want to end up with 1 lining zipper pocket top panel cut out of your secondary fabric on the fold, 1 lining zipper pocket bottom panel cut out of your secondary fabric on the fold, 2 lining flat pocket panels cut out of your secondary fabric on the fold, 2 main lining panels cut out of your secondary fabric on the fold, and to save fabric, you can always reflect the pattern. 2 main bottom panels cut out of your main fabric on the fold, 2 outer flat pocket panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric on the fold. And lastly, 2 main top panels cut out of your main fabric on the fold. Before we get started, not all of the sizes are going to be cut on the fold of the fabric, just the large and the medium because those take up a lot more paper. If you do want to reflect the pattern, that's totally fine too. You don't have to cut on the fold. When it comes to the small and extra small, those are full panels, so you don't have to cut on the fold. I just wanted to point that out before we start sewing. The large and the small are half the panels. I'm going to be using the large in the video, so if you're choosing to use the small or the extra small, the panels might look a little bit different in the video. But anyways, moving on to construction, we're going to start by grabbing the lining zipper pocket top and the lining zipper pocket bottom panel. Separate the panels with right sides facing up. Grab your 7 to 15 inch zipper, and this is depending on the size you are making. You just want to make sure the zipper is longer than the width of the panels because we are going to be trimming the ends. Using the pattern, locate the zipper edge. It's going to be the longer side of the panel, and this is where we're going to be attaching the zipper, so place the right sides together, add a few pins to keep it in place. Grab the second lining panel, place it on the opposite side of the zipper with right sides together. Line the sign edges up with the first panel, place a few pins, and then we're going to stitch both sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to open up the panels with right sides facing up, locate the seam allowance, and we're going to fold that away from the zipper on both panels. Since we're only using 1 layer for this pocket, we want to hide that seam allowance on both sides, so what we're going to do is add a top stitch. With the seam allowance folded away from the zipper, we're going to add a top stitch sewing directly on top of the seam allowance. If done correctly, the zipper edge should cover most of the raw edge on the inside of the pocket. This is going to be a lining pocket, so more than likely you're not going to see it on the inside of the bag. A quick way to fix that is to serge these panels to the zipper instead of stitching them. This panel is complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab the lining flap pocket panel. And what we're going to do is, using the pattern, locate the top edge. You should have 2 panels cut out of your secondary fabric, and we're going to place the right sides together. Line both of the panels up perfectly, and we're going to stitch just the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing the stitch, we're going to flip the wrong sides together, lining up the outside edges, place a few pins so the fabric doesn't shift around, and you want that top edge to be lined up perfectly. And then we're going to add a top stitch to the top edge. After finishing up the top stitch, the outside edges should still be lined up. If not, you can always dethread and try again. But from here, this panel is complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab the main lining panels. Separate the panels with right sides facing up. Grab the zipper pocket assembly from the previous step, line it up on the top edge, and the flap pocket below the top edge on the second panel. You want the flap pocket to be a 1/2 inch away from the bottom notch. Then we're going to fold the bottom edge inward to clean up the raw edge. We're going to do the same with the zipper assembly, but this one you do want it to be lined up perfectly with the top edge of the panel. And just like with the first one, we're going to roll the bottom edge under to hide the raw edge. It's best to place a few pins so the layers don't shift around, and then we're going to stitch directly on the rolled edge. After finishing up the stitch, you should have nice clean edges at the bottom of both of the pocket assemblies. When it comes to the zipper assembly, you can actually extend this to be longer. You just want to make sure you're out of the seam allowance for that bottom notch area. The same goes for the flap pocket. You want to be out of the top area so you don't sew it in future steps, and then you want to be out of the seam allowance for the bottom notch. And for this one, you can also sew dividers for more organization if you would like. Before moving on to the next step, if you did use a zipper roll, you're going to want to place your zipper train on now, and then we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the outside edges. Place a few pins so the layers don't shift around, and then we're going to stitch just the sides, the bottom, leaving a 4 to 5 inch gap in the center, and we're stitching at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're not going to be stitching the top edge. And for the bottom opening, you can make it smaller for the smaller sizes. You just want to leave enough room so you can pull the bag out at the end. For the side stitches, you want these to be at exactly a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so it matches the circumference of the main panels at the end. Before moving on, it's best to quickly look at the right side to make sure all those layers got stitched together and the pockets aren't slipping out. If everything is looking good, we can snip the zipper ends flush with the seam allowance and move to the bottom notch areas. Using the pattern, you can see there's a corner stitch guide, and that's just showing we're going to be sewing this corner together. What I like to do is grab in the corner, pull it apart evenly, and line up the side seams. You want these to be perfectly lined up before you start sewing, so I recommend placing a few pins. Then we're going to do the same thing for the opposite side. Once you have everything lined up and pinned down, we're going to stitch both sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to flip the right sides out, double check, make sure all the layers got stitched together and the corners are looking good. And this entire lining assembly is complete, so for the moment we can place it off to the side and grab the outer flat pocket panels. Separate the secondary from the main fabric with right sides facing up. Using the pattern, locate the top edge, and this is going to be the longer side of the panel, and just like with the inside lining pockets, we're going to place the right sides together, line up the outside edges, and stitch just the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the wrong sides together just like we did with the lining flat panel. Make sure the top edge is lined up and even, place a few pins so the layers don't shift around, and then we're going to add a top stitch to the top edge. To hide any imperfections in the top stitch, I recommend matching your thread color to your fabric color. And from here, the outer pocket assembly is complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab the main bottom panels. Separate the panels with right sides facing up. Then we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the outside edges, and stitch just the sides and the bottom at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving the top edge and notches unstitched. Just like with the lining, we want these sides to be at exactly a 1/4 inch seam allowance so the circumference matches in the end. If you think it's off, I recommend dethreading and trying again. Just like in the previous step, we're going to locate the corner sew guide. Using that as a reference, we're going to pull the corners apart, lining up the side seams, place a few pins. Once you have the side seams lined up and pins in position, we're going to stitch both sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, flip the right sides out, double check the bottom, make sure all the layers got stitched together and the side edges are even. This will be the bottom of the bag, so you want those to be perfectly even so the bag sits flat. If everything is looking good, this bottom assembly is complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab the main top panels. Unfold the panels with right sides facing up. For this step, we only need one of the panels, so we can place the second one off to the side. Place the pattern directly on top of the panel and locate the eyelet placement guide. Mark the placement guide on one side, reflect it over to the opposite side, and mark the second eyelet placement guide. You do want these to be lined up and precise because we're going to be rolling that top edge over. For this bag, I'm using smaller eyelets. Feel free to change up the size and use whatever size eyelets you would like. Cut the eyelet placement guide's marking using scissors or a punch. Place the main part of the eyelet through the opening from the right side of the fabric. Flip the panel around to the wrong side and add the backing. I'll be using a hammer die to install the eyelet. It came with the kit. It's easy to use. Feel free to use a press or pliers. If you're using the hammer die, you're going to place the base on the right side of the fabric, and then you're going to hammer it down on the opposite side. Remove the base, flip it over to the right side, double check, make sure it's nice and secured onto the fabric, and then we're going to repeat the same thing for the opposite side. I do want to quickly go over, if you're using a thinner fabric, you may want to add a backing on the wrong side of the fabric so that way it locks all those layers together and doesn't rip out. I'm using a fairly sturdy denim, but it's always good just to add some interfacing to give it more durability. But anyways, moving on, we can slide this panel to the side, grab the second main top panel, and the outer flat pocket assembly. Place the secondary fabric side of the outer flat panel on the bottom edge of the main top panel, and make sure it's the main top panel without the eyelets. Line up the sides and bottom edges, and then we're going to place the second main top panel directly on top with right sides together. Again, line up the outside edges, place a few pins so the layers are secure, and stitch just the side edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is another stitch that you want the 1/4 inch seam allowance to be perfectly accurate to match the circumference of the inside lining. If everything is looking good, we're going to flip the right sides out and move over to the side seam. This next step is optional. We're going to be adding a top stitch, and it's going to be on the side opposite of the pocket. So we're going to fold the seam allowance away from the pocket and add a top stitch by stitching directly on top of the seam allowance, sewing on the panel with the eyelets. And as you can see, after finishing that stitch, it really brings that edge together and makes it look more professional. It's also going to add another layer of strength, but again, it is optional. You don't need to add it if you don't want to. But anyways, moving on, we're going to shift the panel around back to the side seam. Cut 2 11 to 12 inch strips of 1 inch width webbing. These are going to be going on the side, so you can play around with the height. Line them up directly with the side seam, and you want it to be under the eyelets and over the pocket. Keep in mind, we will be rolling the edge over, so if you have a little bit of extra, that's totally fine. You can hang it off the bottom and give yourself enough room to add your D-ring and roll the edge over once. And you do want some to hang off the bottom edge. When it comes to the height, you can make it taller. You just don't want to go past the eyelets. There's a few different ways you can stitch it. You can add a stitch at the top and bottom, a box stitch, or stitch the whole thing. Move to the opposite side seam and place your second webbing strip and D-ring. You want the D-ring to line up perfectly with the opposite side, or else it's going to be offset when you wear the bag. So it's best to pin these down before you start sewing, and then you can sew it however you would like. I'm adding multiple bar tack stitches, one at the top, one at the bottom, and then a couple evenly spread out in the middle. This will create little hooks on the side that you can clip things to. But again, this is optional. You can stitch totally down that side or just add a stitch at the top and the bottom. Before moving on, you do want to quickly check to make sure that these are lined up evenly on both sides. If everything is looking good, we can flip the wrong sides out and grab the main bottom assembly from the previous step. We're going to place it on the bottom edge, the edge opposite of the eyelets with right sides together, lining up the side seams. Place a few pins, and if everything was sewn correctly, the circumference of the bottom should match the circumference of the top. And from here, we're going to sew that entire bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, double check, make sure all the layers got stitched together. And it's always good to flip the right sides out and take a look at it from the outside. Again, this next step is optional. We're going to be adding a top stitch on that new seam. I'm going to be adding mine on the main bottom assembly side, so I'm going to move the seam allowance towards the bottom and stitch directly on top of the seam allowance. Feel free to move the seam allowance in the opposite direction and add it on the main top panel side. I'm using a thicker fabric for that bottom section, so I wanted to add the top stitch on that side to give it more of a covered look. But anyways, grab the lining assembly and flip the right sides out. And then flip the wrong sides out for the new assembly. We're going to be placing the lining on the inside of the new assembly with right sides together, lining up the side seams. If everything was sewn correctly, this should line up perfectly, and then we're going to stitch all the way around that outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, double check, make sure all the layers got stitched together and that stitch is perfectly even because this is going to be the top of the bag. If everything is looking good, we're going to separate the lining from the main assembly, locate the opening in the lining, and pull everything through that opening. And this is why you want that opening to be big enough so you can pull everything through. Then we're going to go back to the opening, push the fabric inward so the right sides are together, place a few pins, and add a stitch directly on that edge, sealing off the opening. Again, we're going to quickly double check, make sure the opening is perfectly sealed. You don't want anything falling through. Then we're going to put the lining back in the bag. For this next step, we're going to add a stitch to create a loop for the cord to feed through. But to do this right, you want to push the lining all the way towards the bottom of the bag so both those bottom layers line up. And as you can see at the top, it rolls over. You can also reference your pattern to see the fold line. So what you should be looking at is the main fabric rolling into the bag. You want it to be even, so it takes some moving around to get it lined up. Once you have everything lined up, we're going to add our loop stitch on the top edge directly below the eyelets. This stitch will be very noticeable, so I recommend matching your thread color to your fabric color to hide any imperfections. If you don't want the stitch directly below the eyelets, you just want to make sure it's below the eyelets and above the webbing on the sides. So feel free to move it around for the best look. We're getting very close to being done. The next thing we're going to do is add the cord. I'm using a basic size cord. You can actually swap it out for a larger diameter, but if you do that, you'll need to use larger eyelets. There's several different techniques you can use to feed the cord through. You can use a safety pin, a paper clip. I'm using smaller eyelets, so I can't really use these techniques, so I'm just going to feed it through as is. It takes a little longer, but still works. Then snip the cord to your desired length. To close the top opening, I'm going to be using a double opening cord stopper. You can use double or single opening. You just want to make sure your cord fits snug within the opening, so that way it can stay closed without sliding off. To keep the ends from sliding out of the cord stopper, I'm going to be using cord caps. These are little metal ones. They're really easy to install. You just feed the cord ends through the opening, make a really tight knot, and then pull the cord cap directly over the knot. These are a little bit small for my cord, but I pulled hard enough to make it work. These come in all different styles, so you should be able to find some that work with your project. Lastly, you just snip the cord and melt the ends if you're using a nylon-based cord. It should seal everything up and prevent the cord caps from falling off. After everything is installed, quickly test it out, make sure it stays closed. The cord stopper I'm using is a little bit big for this cord, but it's going to work out in the end. The next step is optional. We're going to cut a 12-inch strip of webbing and use it as a handle in the center of the bag. I'm not actually going to install it, I just want to show that you can add this feature if you would like to. Place it on either side of the eyelets below the loop stitch, and you can stitch it into place or use double-sided rivets. You can also adjust the height of the handle by increasing or decreasing the length of the webbing strip. The second way to install is actually done in previous steps. You sew it in between the lining and the main assembly when you're sewing the top edge. This will put the handle on the inside of the bag so you can tuck it away if you don't want to use it. But again, this is optional, you don't need to add it. I just wanted to show you a few different techniques if you wanted to add another handle. But anyways, moving on, the main portion of the bag is complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab our 1.5 yards of 1-inch width webbing. We're going to be using this to make the main strap. If you feel like it's too big, you can always trim it down, but I recommend waiting until you assemble it, because you can always trim it down quickly in future steps. Going along with the webbing, you'll need 1 strap adjuster and 2 lobster clasps. You want these to be 1-inch width to match your 1-inch width webbing. Start by feeding the strap adjuster onto the webbing and sliding it down about 2 feet. Feed 1 clasp on the same end and pull a lot of webbing through. Move back to the strap adjuster and pull slack out the center. Feed the webbing end back through the strap adjuster from the back opening to the front opening. Move the slack to the clasp side, then roll the webbing end over once and add a pin. This side is complete and ready to sew, but before we do that, we're going to grab the second clasp and feed the opposite side of the webbing through the opening, roll the end over once, and pin it down. Now that we have both ends pinned down, we're going to add a tack stitch to both sides. For more support, feel free to add a box stitch, an X stitch, or even more bar tack stitches. But other than that, the strap is complete, so you can adjust it, try it on, and de-thread one side, trim it down if you need to. I always like to make them a little bit bigger so I have room to make adjustments. Grab the bag, and since we're using lobster clasps, all you have to do is clip it to the D-rings on the sides. And there's a lot of fun things you can do with the strap. You can make it look more fancy. I do this in separate videos. If you're going for more of a purse look, or you can make it look more standard like this. So have some fun with it and customize it to the look of your bag. Going into the final step, that's adding the branding. I use leather strips that I installed with double-sided rivets. These also serve as a double purpose. I can clip things to them, and I also like the look of it. Before we're done, I want to quickly show you the other sizes of the bag. I tried to make it perfectly symmetrical going down in scale, so you can make a fun matching set like I did, or you can make them all different. All these sizes do come in the pattern, and they're assembled the same way. Like always, have some fun with it, get creative, and if you ever have any questions, you can always send me a message on my website at properfitclothing.com. properfit.com. And there you have it, your new tote handbag is complete. Hopefully yours turned out awesome. I'd love to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, and until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.